Hey everybody, welcome back to Bug Proletariat 40k. It's been a little bit since I've recorded another video. I just haven't had a chance to play a lot of 40k lately. But I thought I would release a video after I saw a question about Brood Brothers over on the GSC Facebook page. And especially with the Guard Codex coming out imminently, a lot of us probably are going to start looking at those options to include in our army as, you know, a Brood Brothers detachment. So I thought it would be useful to go over the rules on how you can actually accomplish that, because it is pretty confusing now with the new Nephilim book, our Codex, and especially with the Guard Codex coming in, to see how it all might work together. So I'm sure everyone has seen the new balanced data slate come out. I actually wrote an article about it over on Frontline Gaming that I'll have linked down in the description below. I'm sure all of us are disappointed that, you know, GSC yet again was never touched. We are the ultimately best balanced faction. I always tell the buddies in my gaming group, like, whoever wrote the GSC book should just write all the codexes. It's a beautiful book. It's not too powerful. It's not too weak. There's a ton of, you know, balance within the codex between the units in the codex, and it fit well into the game. But I guess the other writers of the other codexes just didn't get that memo. But some of the things, you know, I guess I'll go over real quickly in case you don't want to read the full article that did come out of the balance update. The Silent King losing core is big. You can't reroll to hit or wounds now. I just don't think it really affects the ability of Necrons to score. Just drop hundreds on people. My other army is Necrons, which I play a bunch. And I don't think taking the Silent King out of my army makes it any worse. I think if anything it might make it a little better by just letting me take 400 points of more good OBSEC bodies with a couple Satan. I think that's just as good, if not better, than the Silent King builds. One actual nerf is to the Tyranids and Leviathan in particular. So I think players are just going to move away from Leviathan completely at this point, but there are just still good and maybe even better, because we just don't know, because everybody played Leviathan. Hive cults, not hive cults, tendril feeder, something. I forget what they're called in the Tyranid Codex. Chapters, whatever. In the Tyranid book, you know, like Behemoth is pretty good. Kraken, I know a lot of people are really high on. I think Hydra's cool with all, like, a bunch of Hormigons. So that book has plenty of options, and I just think you just don't see warriors, because they're just not pointed appropriately outside of that Leviathan buff now with the points like they took. And it is a shame that they don't do points in conjunction with this, because rules change, so the points probably need to change as well, right? But we just have to wait till the next chapter approved for the points updates. Harlequin's got a little nerf. Probably we don't really care about that at all. They're still a good army. They'll still remain to do fine. The Space Marines got a quote buff that, I mean, I'm sorry, Space Marines. Us GSC players know it's a rough sometimes out there, but they have it rough right now with like a 39% win rate. And while this data slate, like, it's probably not what any of us wanted to see. And it's such a light touch by GW when, you know, more could be done to help those factions that are lagging behind. Oh, speaking of, the AdMech one is one I forgot to mention. I think this is absolutely bonkers, and I included in the article. I think it's terrible for the game for AdMech to go back to their pre-nerf, 100% pre-nerf days. So now you have things like AdMech, Votan, Tau, the Guard Codex coming out that just, within a shooting phase or two, can just wipe armies off the table, especially our poor little GSC. And, well, that probably doesn't affect the higher tables as much, because, you know, better players can play around that, use terrain to their advantage, plan for that in their army building. It definitely affects the middle to lower tables and creates those feel bad moments of, you what am I even doing here? I came to this tournament to play some 40k, and I got to play a turn and a half against Votan, Tau, Admech. So we'll see how that plays out. I gotta believe that they took such a light touch to it because sometime next year we'll probably get a new edition. So maybe they don't want to mess with things too much. And I mean, in their credit, right now is the best the game I think has been in 9th edition. But that's just not saying a lot, right? Like before we had Tau Custodes dominating stuff. We had Harlequins at like an 80% win rate. We had Dark Eldar. We had Tyranids. We kind of still have Tyranids that are doing very well. Like there's not really been a time in this edition, maybe except for at the very beginning, where everything felt like it was balanced and everybody had an equal chance. And not in a game like this, all the armies aren't going to have an equal chance, right? But I would really like to see that, 65% top win rate to 39%. We got to really get that reined in. That's a huge margin of error, and the 39%, you're not winning a tournament, right? Like, if you want to be a competitive 40k player, there is zero reason you should play any of those armies. But if you love Admech or you love Space Marines and that is your only army you have, it just feels real bad for those players to go out there knowing they're just at such a huge disadvantage. All right, so let's move on to our main topic for the video about how to include Brew Brothers detachments in your GSC army. So it's really cool, first off, that we can take one guard detachment in our army. It's, very fluffy. It represents the cults, integrating their way into the army on the world that they're on. And then when the time is right, you pop out and you have all this guard, tanks, weapons, heavy weapons that your cult managed to steal and get control of before the time is right. So you can just have one guard detachment in your army with a Brew Brothers keyword. And then anything in there has to have the regiment or unaligned keywords. So if it doesn't have the regiment keyword, at least now with the current Guard Codex, you just can't take it as a Brew Brother detachment. So things like Scions you can't take, for example. And then they all lose that regiment keyword and get a Brew Brothers keyword and get loyalty to the cult as their regiment bonus. So all those models are going to add to their leadership characteristic, and then they get the unquestioning loyalty ability. So they can take wounds for your characters, and they'll be at leadership, I think a Guard Sergeant 7, so they'll be at 9, which is pretty good. A Guard Sergeant might be at 6, but I think he's at 7. So that's a very basic overview of how you add it. But then this also has some cascading effects into your army as well. So first off, and the biggest drawback why a lot of people aren't going to do this as soon as I say this, is you can't use the secondaries, the GSC secondaries, in the Nephilim book if you take Brew Brothers. Unfortunately, just the way that the Nephilim faction-specific secondaries are written, every unit in your army has to share a single keyword. And those guard units have the Brew Brother keyword, but they don't have the Genestealer Cult or Tyranny keyword on their data sheets. Hopefully this is something that GW changes, and it might be something that your local TO will allow. If you go to them and say, hey, if I take Brew Brothers, rules is written, I can't take these GSC secondaries, but that's crazy. What do you think? They might let you, but just know if they say no, they're well within their rights, because right now rules is written, you can't take the GSC secondaries in Nephilim. And we'll kind of talk about afterwards why you might want to do this to include those Brew Brother units. And there are secondaries, that, because GSC is so good at secondaries already, you can do the generic ones and still have a fully functioning army. So 25% or less of your points has to be in that Brew Brothers detachment for you to keep Crossfire. So you can't have more than 25% of that 2,000 points in that Brew Brothers detachment, or you lose the Crossfire keyword. And so I think Crossfire is pretty important depending on how you're going to build your army. I'm assuming you're taking the Guard to get some more shooting in there, and then a GSC portion you're going to have a little bit of close combat, but maybe even more shooting. So keeping Crossfire in there is so important to get that +1 hit and +1 to wound and the ignoring cover if you're within half range of the weapons, or within 12. And I've already gone over the +2s for their morale and the unquestioning loyalty. These are just mini buffs basically to the Guard. All the Guard regiments are better than this, but at least they can now have some synergy with your other units. And then the last restriction is you just can't give any relics or Warlord traits to anything in that Brood Brothers detachment, because it can't have your Warlord in it, and you just can't buy any relics. It'd be cool if you could buy some of the Guard relics, but unfortunately this is not an option for us. So some people look at those restrictions and think, if I can't take things like Brood Swarm or Ambush, that's a pretty big drawback. I don't think I'm going to do this. Like, what are the benefits to taking your Brood Brothers detachment? And especially with the Guard getting their new codex coming up really soon. I've looked at some of the leaks, but I haven't had a chance to really dive into it. But as far as right now, ignoring all that indirect fire negatives that were put into the game, rightly so put into the game, that nerf indirect fire, Guard ignores all of that, and you still get that if you're a Brood Brothers detachment using Wyverns, Manticores, Basilisks, or now, I think in the new codex, the Death Strike missile is supposed to be very, very good. And if that stays in the Guard Codex, having that level of indirect fire that other armies just don't have access to is going to be a huge benefit. Now, you don't really need things from the Guard like cheap infantry bodies. We already have that in the Neophytes, right? So I would really just look at the tanks, indirect fire. If Limit Rust battle tanks keep their 2+ save and armor contempt, they're extremely hard to kill now. My buddy, I played my last game with Genestealer Cult. He was playing with a bunch of Guard parking lot basically tanks with infantry in front of them, and my Ridge Runners were shooting lasers into them and just could not kill the tanks in one go with 3d3 mining laser shots with +1 damage. They're just so tough now with that -1 to incoming AP and a 2+ save, and who knows what other rules they're going to get from the Guard stratagems in the new codex. So really you're looking at taking the Brood Brothers for those tanks. Now the biggest drawback is having no GSC secondaries. You're only playing with, and you probably can't take those Guard secondaries either when the Guard Codex comes out. If it's in Nephilim, you definitely can't because you don't share that keyword. So you only have access to the basic secondaries that everyone has access to, but that's not that big a deal for Genestealer Cult because we have 3 categories that we can actually play in pretty reliably for every single game. So Battlefield Supremacy, behind enemy lines, is not a bad secondary at all for GSC. You take some 5-man Acolyte squads, lying in wait squads, that Neophyte squad of shooting that you might want to put in your enemy's deployment zone to get off Crossfire anyway. And you only need to end the turn with 2 units in your enemy's deployment zone 3 times during the game to get 12 points. That's perfectly respectable and definitely achievable for a Genestealer Cult player. An engagement front, as much as I don't like it because it's kind of unpredictable, especially with how fast some of your stuff's going to be dying, you actually absolutely can do it. Get 10 at least in the game by, again, deep striking in the different quarters, moving, your assault units, your Genestealers up as long as they don't die, or go back into ambush. Engage is always something that you can score, and as long as you focus on it throughout the game, you should be able to get a respectable score. So that's 2 options for you right there. Shadow operations, all GSC players know, retrieving Nephilim data is a 12 for us. It's very easy to score. As long as you don't have too many other actions that you're trying to complete with those 5-man Acolyte squads, you should be able to hop 1 in that 4th quarter lying in wait if your opponent tries to screen you out, and just get 12 for that for every game. If for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable taking that, Raised Banners now is a pretty good pick because your opponent can only take the banners down in that command phase and you can put them back up and you score it at the end of the game. So either one of those is a good pick, although I would take Retrieve Nephilim data most games. And then that 3rd category we could always take is Warcraft. Now, if you're looking at something like Inciting Interrogation, which is very good, I would always want 2 Psychers in my list. Or Warp Ritual is another good one. I would always have a Magus and a Patriarch in there, because just one, you're not getting the benefit of the powers that are so good, the Advance and Charge, the Might from Beyond, the Mass Hypnosis, because once you cast that Warpcraft power, you can't cast any other powers. So really if you plan on taking this Warcraft thing, make sure there's 2 Psychers in your list. And then the last 2 categories, you're not going to be able to take every game, but just know they're there in assassination and bring it down for purge the enemy. Bring it down is pretty self-explanatory. If they have a lot of big monsters or vehicles, probably a good pick. Assassination is always kind of wonky. They really have to have characters that are close combat, and like their whole game plan is obviously to send those characters out at you. No mercy, no respite. Grind them down. Nope, don't ever take this as a GSC player, probably. People are going to take it against you, but it's just not gonna work for us because we have so many squishy bodies on the table. No prisoners is pretty good, especially now with the bonus points that you can score from it. So that could be, if you didn't take 2 psychers, no prisoners might be that other third secondary, although you can never guarantee that you're going to score a ton of points from it. Hopefully that quick overview of the Brew Brothers rules, help some of you out there include some of these new guard units into your list. And, if you're struggling, with that Twisted Helix build or playing close combat, because it can be kind of tough, especially now with how, shooting heavy the meta is going to shift into. I feel like it can be tough out there if your tournament doesn't have a lot of terrain, or just how, not resilient our units are. By including some of those guard tanks to include that indirect fire that can really give you a leg up on your opponent, or those really tough tanks, and by having just so many neophyte bodies on the table to screen them, it could be a really, really interesting combination. So one thing I'm kind of looking at is a deep supplies list that's kind of popular going around right now with a bunch of neophytes and seismic cannons, but then also including that guard detachment with tanks and indirect fire to have even more firepower on the board. And, while the guard units aren't going to get the benefit of the deep supplies or ignoring any of the negative penalties from the cult, they can just sit behind terrain on your back objective and just blast, over top of your units and just pile on more and more firepower. So I'll try and play some games with that and see how it works out for me. Unfortunately, I just don't have a tournament coming up anytime soon, just the way my schedule's been working. But by the time I get to go to a tournament, the new Guard Codex will come out, so I'll be able to look through that and see, what new units will be worth taking as the Brew Brother detachment. Thanks for listening, everybody, and I'm hoping it won't be as long until my next video. I'll probably try and have one up in a few days to make up for the month-long hiatus I was on. I appreciate everybody for listening as always, and if you like the content or you're looking for some more specific content, like and subscribe to the channel. I definitely appreciate it. And if you want to see anything specific, just comment below. I'm always looking for more ideas on what people out there are looking as far as Genestealer Cult content. Thanks and good luck in all your games out there.